Hi everyone. So now we're on to week 4 of Emotionally Healthy Spirituality in terms of our Sunday preaching series, which means that in terms of our small groups, we're looking this week at enlarging your soul through grief and loss. And so I guess in many ways it's a bit of a follow-on really from last week and hitting the wall. And if you remember last week, it was about what are all those questions and things that come up when we hit those walls, and the walls come from the earthquake events that we looked at the week before that. So everything is following on from each other. What we're particularly looking at this week is what does it mean to actually handle that grief and loss. And not just in those big moments, but actually we learn to live with loss right from day one. We're in our mother's womb and we get born, and there's loss immediately. We've lost that comfortable, amazing, lovely world of whatever it was like to swim in that, and now we're in a strange place. And there's loss, and we learn to live with it all the way through. We learn to live with the loss of disappointment at school when something hasn't quite worked out, or you've missed out on a school trip, or even now in the little things of life when you're in a traffic jam and therefore you're late for a meeting. We've got to learn to deal with loss, and so it's very natural. It's very natural to have loss, but it does impact us. And so to take a little minute to reflect on how that impacts us and what we do with that and how we deal with disappointment is really important in the small things, so that when it comes to those massive areas of life, like the death of a loved one, it's actually the same principles, but taken at a much bigger impact. So we're going to be looking at the story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, with him facing the biggest loss of everything. The loss of his own life, the loss of his friendships, the loss of, for the disciples, what they thought was going to happen. They thought he was going to be the great leader that took them into a whole new place, and now he's talking about dying. So there's loss everywhere here. And Jesus' example in the garden is that process is hard. You know, it says that he wrestled with all of this to such a point where he was sweating like blood. You know, that's massive anguish and struggle. And so I think the bottom line of it this week is to say it's okay to struggle with loss. It's okay to grieve. It's okay that it's difficult. And the key thing that we're looking at with the title of this is it's enlarging your soul through grief and loss. There's a brilliant verse in the Message translation of Matthew 5 that says, "You're blessed when you feel you've lost what is most dear to you. Only then can you be embraced by the one most dear to you." And I love that verse because it reminds us that actually whatever level the loss is, the hole that it creates and the emptiness that you might well be able to relate to in lots of ways in life, that emptiness is exactly what God wants to fill. And he wants to give us that embrace that we can only really feel when we've gone through these times like Jesus did, where there is that huge loss, that huge emptiness, that huge hole that's there. And so we're going to be looking this week at what grief and loss does with us. And the way in which we can either ignore it and brush it under the carpet, but it still has an impact on us, and that impact isn't always very nice. Or we can choose to let God enlarge our hearts through it and enlarge our souls through it. And if we do that, it means we have to take some time to almost embrace it and listen to it and allow it to break us in a way, really, which means that we let go, and we create that space for God to fill and God to come. So again, I just want to encourage you to be willing to go there in the discussion if you can. And again, I want to thank you for all the stories that we're getting back of how helpful it is when people are feeling that they can do that. Even this week, when we had our course at the centre on Tuesday night, different people were saying that they weren't sure what God was going to bring up through this, or God was saying to them, but finding whole new areas and whole new things that God is speaking to them about. And that's our prayer really for us all as a church, that as we go this journey together, that God will keep bringing up whatever is right for you individually. You know, we're not trying to deliberately dredge through the past. What we're saying is, God, what is it that you want to show me? What is it that you want to, what areas is it that you want to show so that you can just fill them and enlarge my heart and change me? So have a good evening. I'll see you next week.